This is a full spoiler review of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. I'll be discussing the ending, Odysseus' return to Ithaca, and the major changes Nolan makes to the story. Odysseus survives Troy. He survives monsters, starvation, shipwrecks, the consequences of angering Poseidon, and 20 years away from home. Eventually, he makes it back to Ithaca. He reunites with his son, he defeats the men occupying his palace. Penelope finally recognizes the husband she thought she had lost, and then Odysseus leaves. He leaves Ithaca in Telemachus' hands and sails west with Penelope, walking away from the kingdom he spent the entire film trying to reach. At first, the ending may seem like Nolan is rejecting the entire point of the Odyssey. But Odysseus' real journey was never simply about reaching home. It was about whether a man who helped destroy someone else's home could still return to his own. Because by the time Odysseus reaches Ithaca, he has realized something terrifying. The violent men from the sea that his kingdom feared were not coming. They had already arrived, and Odysseus was one of them. Most versions of the Odyssey treat Troy as the event that happened before the real story began. Nolan treats Troy as the reason the journey cannot end. Odysseus does not simply leave the war behind and encounter a series of obstacles on the way home. He carries Troy with him. His greatest victory was the Trojan Horse, a perfect act of strategy. The Greeks offered the Trojans what appeared to be a gift. The Trojans brought it through their gates and into the safety of their own city. Then, under the cover of darkness, Odysseus and his men emerged from inside it. They opened the gates, and 10 years of anger descended upon Troy in a single night. That victory made Odysseus legendary, but it also destroyed something he could never repair. The Trojan horse did not merely breach a wall, it turned trust into a weapon, it transformed hospitality into invasion, and it taught Odysseus that a home could be destroyed from within by the very people it welcomed inside. That is why the film's repeated fear of the people from the sea matters. Ithaca believes that violent strangers may arrive from across the water and destroy the kingdom while it has no king strong enough to defend it. That fear increases the pressure on Penelope to remarry. Odysseus may be alive, Telemachus may be his rightful heir, but Ithaca cannot remain politically suspended forever while an enemy approaches. The kingdom needs a recognized ruler. It needs protection. It needs someone capable of keeping the people from the sea outside of its walls. But near the end of the film, during Odysseus' disguised conversation with Penelope, the truth is revealed. The Greeks were the people from the sea. They arrived at Troy from across the water, they entered its home under false pretenses, and they destroyed the civilization waiting inside. Odysseus has spent years trying to escape monsters, but Troy forces him to recognize that, in somebody else's story, he was the monster arriving at the door. And the encounter with Polyphemus reveals that the violence of Troy is still living inside him. When Odysseus and his men find a lone sheep on one of the islands, one of the soldiers prepares to kill it for food. A sheep is rarely alone. Somewhere nearby there must be a flock, and where there is a flock there may be shelter, food, or someone who owns it. They follow the animal to a cave in the mountain. Inside, they find more sheep and stores of cheese. The owner is gone, and at least one of the soldiers believes they should take what they need and leave quietly. But Odysseus decides to wait. He does not believe they've arrived with hostile intentions. Perhaps the owner will offer hospitality, though they don't have anything to trade. Then Polyphemus returns. He seals the entrance with a boulder, trapping the Greeks inside, and begins killing them. At first, Odysseus' intelligence is the only thing keeping the survivors alive. His men want to attack Polyphemus while he sleeps. Odysseus stops them. If they kill him now, nobody will be strong enough to move the boulder. They may defeat the monster and still die inside this cave. So Odysseus waits. When Polyphemus opens the entrance to release the sheep, several men escape. Odysseus is among them, but some are left behind. He could continue down the mountain with the men who made it out. Instead, he turns back and jumps into the cave before the entrance closes. That decision matters. Whatever else Odysseus may be, Nolan does not portray him as a coward who sacrifices his soldiers to save himself. He returns for them. He waits for Polyphemus to sleep, he leads the attack that blinds him, and he finds a way to hide the men beneath the flock as the Cyclops feels each animal leaving the cave. It is a brilliant plan carried out under impossible pressure, and it works. The surviving Greeks escape, they are outside the cave, the mountain lies behind them, their boat is awaiting below, the danger is over. Odysseus could walk away, but he does not. He stops on the mountain, he turns back toward the blinded Polyphemus standing at the cave entrance, and he fires an arrow into his face. This is the moment the scene changes. Everything Odysseus did before that arrow was necessary for survival. The arrow saves no one. It opens no path of escape. It does not rescue a trapped soldier. It is punishment. Polyphemus had already prayed to Poseidon, revealing that he is the god's son. Odysseus knows that continuing the attack could bring consequences far beyond the mountain, but he fires anyway. Polyphemus charges after them and hurls a boulder toward the departing boat. 2 more soldiers are killed before the other narrowly escape. One of the survivors asks Odysseus why he did it. Why attack a defeated enemy when they were already free? Odysseus answers that the monster had taken the lives of many of their men. In his mind, the arrow was not reckless, it was justice. And that is what makes Odysseus dangerous. His intelligence saves his soldiers from the cave, but his need to avenge the soldiers who died inside it creates 2 more deaths. He believes he is honoring the dead, instead he adds more names to the list of men he failed to bring home. This is how Nolan redefines Odysseus' fatal flaw. The problem is not simply that he wants the world to know how clever he is. The problem is that he cannot accept survival while revenge still feels unfinished. He cannot walk away from a defeated enemy because leaving would feel like allowing the deaths of his men to go unanswered. But every attempt to answer those deaths with more violence creates another death that demands an answer. And Odysseus becomes trapped inside his own moral logic. He killed because men have died, then more men die because he chose to kill. And now their deaths become another burden he must carry. The cave is a smaller version of Troy. In both places, Odysseus' intelligence produces victory. And in both places, victory is followed by violence that survival no longer requires. The Trojan Horse gets the Greeks inside the city. Opening the gates wins the war. Then 10 years of rage descends upon Troy. Blinding Polyphemus gets the soldier out of the cave. Escaping beneath the sheep saves their lives. Then Odysseus turns around and fires the arrow. Again and again, his greatest strength brings him to the edge of safety. And then something inside of him refuses to stop. The rest of the voyage, however, forces Odysseus to confront the consequences of that refusal. After Polyphemus, the journey stops feeling like a series of random obstacles. Each island confronts Odysseus with something he cannot control. Not another monster, not another army, but the consequences of the men he has become. The Sirens make this explicit. Odysseus knows their voices will draw the ship toward destruction, so he commands his soldiers to seal their ears with wax and orders them to tie him to the mast. The men are protected from the song. Odysseus chooses to hear it. And what the Sirens offer him is not simply pleasure or forbidding knowledge. Their song is made from every promise he failed to keep. The promise that he would return to Penelope, the promise that he would bring his soldiers home, the promise that the war would eventually end and allow them to become the men they had been before Troy. Eventually, even his control over his soldiers begins to fail. Before reaching the island of the sun god, Odysseus is warned that the animals there must not be harmed. If the men kill and eat them, none of them will survive. Odysseus understands the warning, and he tries to preserve the lives of the men who remain. But by this point, they are starving. They have survived Troy, monsters, lost ships, and years of following a commander whose decisions have repeatedly placed them between survival and death. Odysseus may still possess authority, but authority means very little to men who believe they are going to die from hunger. The soldiers secretly kill one of the animals and eat it. They know the warning, they understand the possible consequence, and they do it anyway. This time, Odysseus is trying to prevent disaster, but the result exposes another failure of leadership. He can devise a plan that saves his men from an immediate threat. He, however, cannot guarantee that they will continue to trust or obey him afterward. By the time they reach the sun god's island, the crew is no longer held together by loyalty or belief in their king. They are held together by desperation, and desperation finally wins. The storm that follows destroys what remains of the voyage, and the soldiers are lost. Odysseus is left alone. The men who set out from Troy with an army reaches Calypso's island without a single soldier beside him. He has failed to bring any of them home. Calypso can repair his body. She can shelter him, she can keep him alive, but she cannot give him peace, so she gives him the Lotus. Odysseus does not willingly choose to forget. Calypso has fallen in love with him, and the Lotus allows her to suppress the memories pulling him away from her. For 7 years, Odysseus remains on the island without fully understanding how much time has passed. But even the Lotus cannot erase everything. 2 names continue to return to him, Athena and Penelope. Athena appears at the edge of his consciousness, repeatedly asking whether he remembers. The film leaves these encounters deliberately uncertain. To Odysseus, Athena is his protector, the divine presence trying to guide him back towards himself. But when Calypso approaches and sees Odysseus speaking to someone who is not visibly there, Athena also begins to resemble a voice inside his mind, a fragment of identity that refuses to disappear. Calypso eventually admits that she was able to heal his body, but not his mind. Something inside him continued pulling away from her. Odysseus then forces her to tell him how long he has been on the island. 7 years. Once he remembers Penelope, he can no longer remain. He builds a vessel from the wreckage and sails away alone. That departure reveals what Calypso's island was really testing. Odysseus does not return home because his body has finally recovered. He returns because his memory has. The Lotus offered him freedom from Troy, from the dead, and from every promise he failed to keep. But forgetting those failures would also require forgetting the people who made returning meaningful. Penelope is not simply waiting at the end of the journey. She is one of the memories preventing Odysseus from disappearing before he gets there. The Sirens try to destroy him by making him remember every broken promise. Calypso tries to keep him by making him forget them. Odysseus can survive only by doing neither. He must remember what he has done without allowing that memory to become the end of his life, and that is why reaching Ithaca will not solve his problem. Ithaca is where he must finally face the people to whom those promises were made. When Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca, he does not find the home he left behind. The island is still standing, Penelope is still alive, and Telemachus has grown into a man, but politically, Ithaca is collapsing. Odysseus has been gone for 20 years, and nobody can say with certainty whether he is alive or dead. That uncertainty has left the kingdom trapped between 2 possible rulers. Telemachus is Odysseus' rightful heir, but as long as his father may still return, his claim remains unstable. Penelope can preserve Odysseus' household, but she cannot protect Ithaca indefinitely without a recognized king. And somewhere beyond the island, people fear that violent men from the sea are approaching. This is why Penelope's remarriage is more than a romantic decision. Ithaca needs a ruler before an outside enemy arrives. The suitors understand that. They gather inside Odysseus' home, they consume his food, and they compete for Penelope's hand. On the surface, they can present themselves as legitimate candidates for marriage. They are not storming the palace with an army. They are participating in a custom. They are waiting for Penelope to choose. But beneath that appearance, they are already taking control of the kingdom. They feast at Odysseus' table, they occupy his rooms, they tell stories about a war they did not fight, while consuming what remains of the men who did. And they treat Telemachus not as a future king, but as an obstacle that must be removed. They do not immediately attack him. That would expose them as murderers. Instead, they taunt him, they humiliate him. They try to provoke him into striking first, because if Telemachus attacks one of them, they can retaliate while claiming they were only defending themselves. They want him dead, but they also want his death to appear justified. That is what makes the suitors more dangerous than ordinary invaders. They do not reject the rules governing Ithaca. They manipulate those rules until conquest looks legitimate. They use hospitality to occupy another man's home. They use courtship to compete for his kingdom. And they use the language of self-defense to prepare for the murder of his son. That makes Ithaca another version of Troy. The Greeks did not break through Troy's walls by force. They persuaded the Trojans to bring the instrument of their destruction inside. The horse appeared to be a gift. The soldiers hidden within it appeared to be gone. The Trojans believed that the war had ended. Then Odysseus emerged from inside their home and opened the gates. The suitors are doing something similar. They have entered Odysseus' household under the protection of accepted customs. They appear to be guests waiting for Penelope to make a choice, but they are slowly converting hospitality into possession. The difference is that this time, Odysseus is standing outside the home being taken from within. He has returned to experience the same fear he helped inflict upon Troy, and he cannot simply walk into the palace and announce that the king has returned. The suitors control the house. Telemachus is surrounded. Penelope does not know what kind of a man may be coming back. So Odysseus enters Ithaca the same way he entered Troy, in disguise. He presents himself as an old soldier who fought beside Odysseus during the war. He gives Telemachus another name. He tells him that his father is still alive, but does not reveal that the father is standing in front of him. Once again, Odysseus survives by becoming someone else. Once again, he enters a contested home through deception, but the purpose of the disguise has changed. At Troy, disguise allowed him to destroy a city from within. In Ithaca, it allows him to observe what has happened to his own. He can see the suitors before they know they are being judged. He can protect Telemachus without immediately exposing him to greater danger. And he can speak to Penelope without forcing her to respond to the sudden return of a husband she has not seen for 20 years. The disguise gives Odysseus something victory at Troy never did: the opportunity to understand the home before deciding how to take it back. But it also creates an uncomfortable parallel. Odysseus has returned as exactly the kind of figure Ithaca fears: a stranger from the sea, a veteran carrying violence from another kingdom, a man who enters a home under a false identity while hiding what he intends to do once he is inside. To the audience, he is the rightful king. To the suitors, he appears to be a harmless beggar. But from Troy's perspective, Odysseus was also a man who believed his cause justified entering somebody else's home through deception. That is why Nolan cannot treat the reclamation of Ithaca as a simple heroic reversal. Odysseus has every right to defend his family, but the methods he uses are still the methods of the men who opened Troy's gates. Disguise, manipulation, a hidden plan, an enemy trapped inside a place they mistakenly believe they control. The question is no longer whether Odysseus can defeat them. We already know what his mind is capable of. The real question is whether reclaiming his home will turn Ithaca into another Troy. Whether the man who could not stop after escaping Polyphemus will know when to stop inside his own palace, and whether returning home will free Odysseus from the cycle of violence, or simply give him one final place to repeat it. But before the battle answers that question, the film asks something more intimate. Can anyone inside the home still recognize him? Odysseus returns to Ithaca disguised as a stranger, but the disguise does not begin to fail because someone recognizes his face. It begins to fail because Odysseus behaves like himself. The first to recognize him is not Penelope, it's not Telemachus. It is his old hunting dog, Argos. Argos has been pushed outside the home and neglected by the suitors. By the time Odysseus returns, the dog is close to death. Odysseus approaches him carefully. He kneels beside him and shows him a tenderness that nobody else in the household has shown for years. Argos recognizes his master, and then he dies. The moment is small compared to everything Odysseus has survived. There is no battle, no strategy, just an old dog recognizing the man who left him 20 years earlier. But Telemachus is watching. Until this point, he has accepted the stranger's story. This man claims to be an old soldier who fought beside Odysseus at Troy. He knows things about his father. He promises that Odysseus is still alive. But the way he cares for Argos reveals something that information alone cannot. This is not how another soldier would touch the dog. It is how the dog's master would. Telemachus realizes that the stranger standing beside him is his father. Dad. And Odysseus realizes that his son now knows. But neither of them says it out loud. The disguise remains in place because naming the truth too early would put Telemachus in greater danger. The suitors still control the house. The plan is not ready, so father and son recognize one another while continuing to perform the roles of strangers. That restraint tells us something important about this version of Odysseus. For much of his journey, he has struggled to leave an action unanswered. He could not escape Polyphemus without turning back to punish him. But here, he allows the truth to remain unspoken, because protecting his son matters more than hearing his own name. And the film repeats that pattern with Penelope. When Odysseus speaks to her, he remains disguised. He does not announce that her husband has returned. Instead, he speaks about Odysseus as though he were another man. Penelope then asks what happened to Odysseus, and the stranger describes a warrior who found a way to open the gates of Troy, then watched 10 years of rage descend upon the city. He speaks about a man who won the war but could no longer separate victory from what followed. A man who may have lost his way before he even began sailing home. Penelope does not appear to consciously recognize the beggar as Odysseus during this conversation, but she hears something in him that no ordinary soldier could offer. Not merely knowledge of what Odysseus did, an understanding of what those actions did to him. The disguise allows Odysseus to confess without asking Penelope to forgive him. He can describe his guilt without first claiming the authority of a husband or a king. and Penelope can respond to the truth before she is forced to respond to the man. This may be the most honest conversation they have in the film, because Odysseus can speak openly about himself only while pretending to be someone else. He has spent so long surviving through deception that honesty becomes possible only when his identity is hidden. But eventually, recognition must become public. Penelope announces the challenge of Odysseus' bow. The man who can string it and fire an arrow through the line of axes will earn the right to marry her. One by one, the suitors fail. Then the beggar steps forward. The suitors see an old man attempting a task that stronger and younger men cannot complete. They expect humiliation. Instead, Odysseus strings the bow, and in that moment, the disguise is over. He does not remove a mask. He does not stand before the room and declare, "I am Odysseus." He does not need to. The bow says it for him. The bow transforms the harmless stranger into the man the suitors have been waiting to replace. And it reveals the difference between occupying a king's home and possessing what made him a king. Throughout the return to Ithaca, Odysseus is recognized through actions rather than appearance. Argos recognizes his touch. Telemachus recognizes the way he cares for Argos. Penelope hears the guilt carried inside his account of Troy, and the suitors recognize the warrior through the bow. Odysseus never needs to announce his identity, because every part of the home remembers him differently. But recognition does not mean restoration. The fact that Ithaca knows who he is does not answer whether he should become its king again. First, Odysseus must show what he will do now that the disguise is gone and the power to destroy his enemies has returned. Once Odysseus strings the bow, everyone in the room understands who is standing before them. The harmless beggar disappears, the king of Ithaca has returned, and the suitors immediately understand what that means. They are not facing an old soldier hoping to participate in Penelope's challenge. They are facing the man whose home they have occupied, the father of the son they planned to remove, and the husband of the woman they intended to use as a path to the throne. One of the leading suitors asks, "Does he really believe he can defeat us all?" The question reveals their final mistake. They still see strength as a matter of numbers. There are many of them. Odysseus appears to stand alone. But the entire film has shown that Odysseus is most dangerous when he enters a space his enemies believe they control. That was the logic of the Trojan Horse. It was the logic of the escape from Polyphemus. And now, it becomes the logic of the palace. The suitors believed they were attending a marriage contest. Instead, they have gathered inside a trap. The weapons they expected to use are no longer within easy reach. The exits have been secured. Telemachus is no longer the young man they could provoke or intimidate. He is fighting beside his father. Odysseus does not need an army to retake Ithaca. He needs the room, the timing, and the advantage he has spent his entire life learning how to create. The battle is violent because Odysseus is still a violent man. Nolan does not pretend that returning home has purified him. The man fighting inside the palace is still the general who designed the horse, still the survivor who blinded Polyphemus, still the commander carrying the deaths of his soldiers with him. But this confrontation is different from the violence that followed the escape from the cave. At Polyphemus' mountain, Odysseus had already survived. The enemy was blinded, the men were outside, the path to the boat was open, and Odysseus still turned back because escape did not feel like enough. He needed punishment. Inside the palace, the suitors remain an immediate threat. They have occupied his home, they have endangered his wife, they have plotted against his son. And once Odysseus reveals himself, they continue fighting to keep what they have taken. But the most important part of the battle is not that Odysseus kills his enemies. It is what happened when some of them stop resisting. Several suitors bend the knee, and Odysseus leaves them alive. That detail may seem small after the scale of the bloodshed, but it marks the clearest difference between the men on Polyphemus mountain and the men who has returned to Ithaca. At the cave, defeating the enemy was not enough. Polyphemus had already been blinded, Odysseus and his men had already escaped, but Odysseus still needed to make him suffer. In the palace, surrender is enough. The men who continue fighting are killed, the men who submit are spared. Odysseus has not become merciful in any simple sense. He does not avoid violence. He does not forgive every man who participated in the occupation of his home. And the film does not erase the brutality required to restore his family's safety. But for the first time, Odysseus recognizes a boundary. There is a difference between defeating an enemy and destroying everyone who once stood against him. There is a moment when justice ends and vengeance begins. That change prevents Ithaca from becoming another Troy. The palace is reclaimed through bloodshed, but it is not annihilated by it. Odysseus defeats the men who have taken his home without allowing his rage to consume every person inside it. By leaving those who kneel alive, he does something he could not do on the mountain. He accepts that the violence can end, but winning the battle does not automatically restore the life he lost. Odysseus is injured. His palace has become a battlefield. His son has seen the kind of man his father became during the war. And Penelope is waiting for the stranger who reclaimed her home to prove that he is still her husband. Odysseus has shown that he can stop fighting. Now he must discover whether anything remains after the fighting stops. When the battle ends, Odysseus has reclaimed his home, but he has not yet reclaimed his place within it. The palace recognizes him as a warrior. The suitors recognize the men holding the bow. Telemachus has fought beside his father, but Penelope is still waiting. While still wounded, Odysseus approaches her. She already knows who he is. String and the bow exposed him. The battle confirmed it. Odysseus reaches for the small statue of Athena he has carried with him. Then he placed it in Penelope's hands. The object does not reveal his identity for the first time. It confirms something more intimate. The warrior who reclaimed the palace is also the man who left Ithaca 20 years earlier. The men Athena protected. The men Penelope continued to remember, even when the rest of the kingdom began preparing to replace him. And when Penelope receives the statue, she finally says his name, Odysseus. That moment completes a pattern the film has followed since his return. Odysseus is not recognized by his face. He is recognized through the pieces of himself that survived the journey. Argos recognizes his tenderness. Telemachus recognizes the father hidden inside the stranger. The suitors recognize the warrior through the bow. And Penelope recognizes the husband through the object he carried home. But Penelope is not welcoming back the same men who left. That men no longer exist. But the man standing before Penelope designed the horse, opened Troy's gates, watched the rage of the Greek army consume the city, lost every soldier who followed him home, and has spent years wondering whether those deaths were caused by fate, by the gods, or by the choices of the men leading them. That is why the conversation Odysseus had with Penelope while he was still disguised matters so much. Before Penelope knows that her husband is sitting in front of her, she hears what the war did to him. She hears his guilt before she is asked to accept his return. Odysseus does not first present himself as the victorious king. He presents the truth of the broken man, and Penelope does not turn away. She may not consciously recognize him during that conversation, but she listens, she mourns with him, and after the battle, when the disguise is gone and the statue is placed in her hands, she accepts the men connected to that confession. Penelope's happiness does not erase the 20 years between them. It does not restore their marriage exactly as it was, and it does not absolve Odysseus of what happened at Troy or during the voyage. But it answers the question that has haunted his return. Can the man who came back still be loved by the woman who remembers the man who left? Penelope's answer is yes. Not because Odysseus has returned unchanged, but because she is willing to recognize him through that change. Now the next question is whether Odysseus still intends to become the king. Odysseus has returned to Ithaca. Everything appears to be in place for the traditional ending. The rightful king has come home to reclaim his throne, but that is not what Odysseus chooses. The film does not give us a formal ceremony where he publicly gives up power. He does not stand before Ithaca and announce that Telemachus will replace him. But his decision becomes clear through what happens next. Telemachus remains behind to rule Ithaca, and Odysseus leaves. That choice changes the meaning of the entire journey. For 20 years, home has existed in Odysseus' mind as something waiting to be recovered. But when Odysseus arrives, he discovers that home has continued without him. And Odysseus is no longer the king who sailed away. He is the survivor who spent years being shaped by violence, guilt, and memory. This is why leaving the throne to Telemachus makes sense. It is the first decision Odysseus makes after accepting that home does not belong only to the past. Telemachus represents the future of Ithaca. By remaining behind as king, Telemachus is given the opportunity to build something beyond the conflict that defined Odysseus' life. And Odysseus allows him to do that. That may be the final form of restraint the film asks from Odysseus. His departure shows that he has begun to separate protection from possession. He saves Ithaca without demanding that Ithaca become his reward. And this is where the film's idea of home reaches its conclusion. Odysseus sails west with Penelope, apparently to honor the soldiers whose bodies he could not bring home. He is no longer traveling because the gods are preventing him from returning. He's traveling because returning has given him a responsibility he can no longer avoid. Before, Odysseus chose to avenge his fallen soldiers through revenge. That is why he unnecessarily fired the arrow at Polyphemus. By the end, Odysseus chooses a different way to remember his fallen soldiers. Instead of honoring the dead by creating more bodies, he lives to honor them directly. That is the final break in the cycle, and Penelope goes with him. That detail prevents his departure from becoming another abandonment of home. She chooses to travel beside the men who return. Their life together does not resume in the form either of them expected, but it does continue. The king remains in Ithaca, the husband lives with his wife. That distinction is the point. Odysseus gives Ithaca a future that does not depend on restoring his past. He leaves the throne to Telemachus, and he sails west with Penelope to face the memory of the men who never made it home. Odysseus reaches Ithaca as a conqueror, but he completes his journey only when he chooses not to conquer it. And that is why Nolan's The Odyssey is not really about coming home. At least, not in the way Odysseus initially understands it. For most of the film, home is a destination. It is the place waiting at the end of the war. The reward beyond the monsters, shipwrecks, and angry gods. If Odysseus can survive long enough to reach Ithaca, he believes he can recover the life he lost. But Nolan gradually dismantles that idea. Odysseus can return to the island, he can reclaim his palace, he can reunite with his son, he can hear Penelope say his name, but he cannot return as the man who left 20 years earlier. Troy changed him, the journey changed him, and the deaths of his soldiers remain with him even after the sea finally releases him. That is the final difference between the Odysseus who destroyed Troy and the Odysseus who leaves Ithaca. Nolan's The Odyssey begins with a man trying to return to the kingdom he lost, but it ends with that man understanding that home was never the throne. It was the people who could still recognize him after everything that happened. Odysseus returns to Ithaca as a warrior. He lives as Penelope's husband, and only then does his homecoming become complete. This was a longer video than usual, so if you're still watching, type Odysseus in the comments. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.